Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here with us. Please feel free to ask questions and put in the chat and in the Q&A. Thank you so much again, and let's get started. We are going to talk a little bit about meals count and how this tool is developed and supported by 4 organizations. We have Code for America with the Open San Diego, and then we have Nourish California, who is a organization, a statewide organization who advocates for ending hunger, and San Diego Hunger Coalition, who supports San Diego in ending hunger in children and adults. And we also have No Kid Hungry, which is a national organization. And we have created a team that work together to work on the meals count tool to end childhood hunger. Next slide, please. And we're going to talk a little bit about childhood hunger and why we came together to help this situation in the United States. Childhood hunger can be a silent and pervasive problem in the United States. And we know by a study done by Feeding San Diego that about 42 million people in the United States might experience food insecurity, and that includes 13 million children. We are appalled by these statistics, and we know that no child should go hungry, and offering school meals free of charge to all students help ensure that every child has the nutritious food they need to learn, to grow, and to achieve at their fullest potential. So this is a big problem in every state, and even in some of the richest states like California, that you might think they have a lot of money, they don't need any help. We do. And we have enormous problems too. In California, poverty is prevalent in children too. Nearly 1 in 5 California children live in poverty. And the California child poverty rate will be even worse without essential public programs, which include school nutrition programs. When accounting for the cost of living and resources from several public programs, California has the worst child poverty rate in the nation. Before COVID-19, 2 million California kids live in households that struggle with food insecurity. And parents had reported that about 75% they were worried about running out of food. And about 3 in 5 parents, California parents, actually ran out of food during this crisis that we are experiencing. The pandemic has exacerbated these persistent inequities and crises throughout California and throughout the nation. And we know that Black and Latinx families are more under-resourced chronically. These communities have borne the brunt of COVID-19, and we have devastating health economy consequences. And a purpose of this is to give all California kids and all kids in the United States a fair shot at living the lives that they deserve. We must meet the basic needs of children, and we can then close the opportunity achievement and health until every child is well nourished. The school is a great place to meet some of those needs and fight hunger. Each day during the school year, 29.6 million students receive free or reduced prices for lunch. The school nutrition programs provide a critical nourishment to students, and they help support living, and they improve the cognitive function and overall health of the students. So we want to talk about a really powerful federal nutrition program today, and how meals count, the meals count project has helped optimize some of these programs, and it's helping fight hunger in childhood. So this very powerful federal nutrition program is the community eligibility provision. And we're going to have Emily talk a little bit more about the program. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Angeles, for that really powerful overview of the problem and the urgency. And we, on this call, love the community eligibility provision, or CEP. It is a provision of the National School Lunch Program that allows eligible schools to serve breakfast and lunch to all students free of charge. And so the benefits are innumerable. It reduces stigma for participating in the school meals program. So in CEP schools, just like textbooks and desks in school transportation, meals are free of charge. It's a culture. It's no longer a program for the poor kids. It's a benefit for everyone. There's a ton of research on the improvement that occurs in CEP schools around behavioral and academic outcomes because kids have access to free meals and have the routine of starting every day with a nutritious breakfast. It reduces financial stress for parents, of course, and there is no more unpaid school meal debt in CEP schools. So this has been in the press a lot in the last few years, the lunch shaming that can occur when a child doesn't have enough money in their lunch account to pay for their breakfast or their lunch. And it produces a ton of stress for the kid that's put in the situation of not having enough money to pay for their meal. For the school nutrition staff that has to find a way to either call their parents in their household and let them know that their kid doesn't have enough money to be able to eat at school. Those are really difficult conversations and situations, and it's really, again, in the wealthiest country in the world, in the wealthiest state in the country, we should not be nickel and diming students for a breakfast and a lunch. And with CEP, you don't. It improves school nutrition staff morale, and it is associated with the ability to streamline the administrative side of the program. And so you're only counting the total number of meals served. You don't have to figure out, Emily qualifies for a free breakfast, so she is counted at this rate, and Amanda qualifies for a reduced price breakfast, so we count her at this rate. You're just tallying the number of meals served, and it really streamlines the administrative burden associated with these programs as well. And lastly, it's important to know that CEP is a 4-year cycle. So if a school adopts it this year, they can guarantee free meals for all through school year 24-25. And we can head to the next slide, Nikolai. So schools are eligible if they have a, quote, identified student percentage, or an ISP, of 40% or more. And what this figure is basically a measure of a school's poverty level. When students live in households that participate in SNAP, in TANF, which is cash assistance, the food distribution program, and in some states, Medicaid, as well as if they are in foster care, experiencing homelessness, migrant, or in Head Start, those students are included in this identified student percentage. And essentially, if 40% or more of a school's enrollment participates in one of these programs, then the school is eligible to operate CEP and serve meals free of charge to all. On the next slide, schools or a group of schools can participate in CEP together. And so I'm not going to go into the nitty-gritty on the reimbursement formula, but it's important to know that a school with an identified student percentage between 40 and 62.5% gets partial reimbursement for the meals that they serve. At 62.5% and above, those schools receive 100% federal reimbursement for the meals that they serve, and it's really a no-brainer to operate CEP if the ISP is that high. And meals count comes in because all of these schools with the higher ISPs can be grouped with lower ISP schools to maximize the participation in the program and to maximize a district's funding that they receive. But a school district with 12 schools has actually more than 4 million possible grouping combinations. So a school nutrition director tinkering in an Excel spreadsheet and shuffling around their schools is not going to instill a lot of confidence that they've found the optimal grouping scenario that's going to maximize their funding and their school's participation in CEP. So before we dive into meals count and the algorithms that really optimize that calculation for school districts, I'll show a very rudimentary example on the next slide of grouping and how it works. So I have 3 schools on the slide. The first does not qualify for CEP. It has an ISP that is lower than that 40% threshold. The second just barely qualifies, and the third overqualifies, really. It's above 62.5%, so it's getting all of the meals that it serves free. And if we put them all together on the next slide as one group, now the 30% school can serve meals free of charge to all. And you're bringing up the ISP of those lower 2 schools, essentially, and putting them all together, they're all getting 80% of the meals that they serve at the maximum reimbursement rate, and the remainder at the minimum reimbursement rates for the meals that they serve. So grouping is a strategy to maximize participation in this amazing program and to maximize a school district's funding to make sure it works for them and their students. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to you, Nikolai, to introduce Meals Count and the software that does this optimization.
Thanks so much, Emily, and thanks, Angeles. Yeah, so now that you guys have kind of an understanding a little bit of CEP, or the community eligibility provision, we're going to say, what is Meals Count? So I hit the right window. So first of all, it really at its core is a collaboration between the Open San Diego Code for America Brigade volunteers, Nourish California, and San Diego Hunger Coalition, and No Kid Hungry. Secondly, it's a model of the CEP funding formula. So Emily kind of walked you through some of the wonkish formulas there. Really, there are like specific funding formulas that come in together, and this is a model, a programmatic model of that funding, and a bunch of strategies, so different algorithms that we can use to try to optimize the groupings, all written in Python. And thirdly, it's a website and front-end application that has a user interface for districts to self-serve, so they can go in there with their district data, and they can go in and explore different grouping scenarios to understand what potential increases in reimbursements they can get. So how it works, so essentially it takes in the data from the school districts per school, really the total enrolled school kids per each school, the total eligible, and then the daily lunches and breakfast that they serve. Then we use computers basically to run lots of different grouping scenarios, and then we provide an adjustment, and then we allow adjustment for the schools, so so through their predictions and their groupings, and that's specifically because there's a lot of unknown variables in terms of estimating, if we do change, how many kids will be on there, or how many kids will be buying lunch, and so on. So kind of a simplistic example, extending upon what Emily started here. If we have 2 schools at 40% and 2 at 85%, if we group them this way, then you see one batch gets basically the pay rate or below, the other batch is above the threshold, so it's kind of wasted qualification there, and so you only get half the schools getting the full rate. Whereas if we switch around the grouping in this naive example, then we get everyone over the 62.5% threshold, and everyone gets a full rate. So essentially, we have an optimization problem from the computer science perspective. And so when you scale it up, as Emily mentioned, over 4 million groups for a school of 12, and you get up to 20 to 25 district schools for a lot of districts. I think we ran the numbers, at least 8.5% of all districts in the country have more than 12 schools. So you can see in this example, this is a nearby school here near San Diego called Oceanside Unified. And just from a trivial optimization to a more significant optimization in terms of compute time, you see a 13% increase in the total amount of reimbursements, which for Oceanside turns into plus or minus $250,000 a year. You can imagine a larger district would have significantly more money from that, and of course in aggregate that adds up to a lot of money going towards meals around the country. So really, I mean, we kind of say this, but it's kind of, in Meals Count, you essentially do have, to some degree, asterisk free money, in the sense that when you're applying for this funding from the USDA, if you just apply with the same batch of schools one way, you get one level of reimbursement, but you organize them a little bit differently, and thanks to kind of the looseness and the slop in this policy, you suddenly get more reimbursement for exactly the same outcome, exactly the same schools in the list, exactly the same logistical work, just a little bit of compute time in between. So that's really kind of the power and the excitement of using Meals Count. All right, I'm going to do a quick tour of how the Meals Count software works for the technically minded people, or just in general. So the first part is going to be the policy model. So we have an open source, everything in Meals Count is open source and free for all users. We have an open source software that basically replicates the CEP funding formula based upon what was published by the USDA. And they have an Excel sheet that shows how that works. And we incorporate the baseline data set published by another nonprofit, FRAC, to feed that in there. And from that policy model, where we model the different thresholds and the different calculations of reimbursement rates and essentially what the reimbursement would be, we have a basket of algorithms. So one of the things that we realized was just having one algorithm that is going to say, okay, this is what we think is going to be optimal, really wasn't telling us if we were going to be optimal. Instead, we really kind of sought to have different approaches. So one example is a Monte Carlo stochastic climb. So it's an algorithm that kind of shuffles and reshuffles things and does it lots of iterations and tries to find the best one. Another case is a greedy linear optimization or linear programming type algorithm. And then we also have, for the smaller schools that are 12, smaller districts 12 and under, it's still a great barrier to try to optimize them by hand. We just run the full exhaustive computation of all possible combinations. But across all these different algorithms that we run, we basically take every district, we run all of the ones as much as possible, and then we come out with the highest winner of the basket of algorithms. And different algorithms have different success rates. So this is kind of the optimization package that we put together. And the last piece of the software is the user interface. And this is really something I want to stress because when the project first got started, it was kind of, okay, we'll just make this tool and this. And there really was, it was hard, to communicate the challenge to the potential users. And the users are a very special set of people. They're the nutrition directors and the CFOs of these school districts. They're, of course, as everyone can imagine, completely overtaxed as it is with all the things they have to do. Don't have a lot of time to get into it here. We have to make it, first of all, trustworthy, because I'm sure they'd be suspicious if I just showed up and say, hey, I'm from the brigade, I've got the software to help. Yeah. And so instead, we want to create a really good brand. And so that's one of the benefits working with the brigade, that we're able to create a great brand, a great looking website, and also really focus on making the user interface as simple and as pre-filled, but also as informative as possible and easy as possible to explore different scenarios. And we've definitely gone through several iterations, kind of constantly doing user interviews with districts to make sure that we understood kind of what their concerns were. And there are a lot of concerns to think about. For instance, the algorithm might pop out saying, here's the best way to combine the schools. But then, as we have an example here in San Diego County, we have a school where two of the schools are actually on a military base, and they have low ISP because they don't have a lot of kids below that threshold. But there's just no tenable way that district could roll out this free meals for all and exclude the military schools just because it was inconvenient for the optimal grouping. So that we really had to allow even though that was the number one recommendation, we had to give them the flexibility to adjust. And that was kind of a thing we learned along the process. So again, just the prioritizing usability and building a brand, encouraging early adopters to really getting out there and doing user testing, and providing, not just making just the tool itself, but providing a whole website that's got FAQs, that has, we've been trying to build relationships with different state agencies to try to get any concerns they have, any contact information they have there. And then also reaching out and integrating to external calculators and Excel spreadsheets used to do other financial calculations to make sure that those things can work together, to make sure that we meet, where this is being done at the end of the day is on a spreadsheet in the office of a district somewhere. And so, yes, they want to pull and push things from the web, but really they like to work on whatever calculations and modeling that they're doing, and tying that into to the Meals Count grouping operations. So that's a quick overview of the software. I'm going to quickly talk about how Meals Count came about. So it was originally pitched to Code for America in 2017. This predates my involvement in it, but I just was talking to some of the original people on the project. The captain of Open San Diego at the time was Jerry Hall, and he is super passionate about this, and he's always been super passionate about it. And he worked with some early work with Nourish California at the time, which was CFPA at the time, and they picked it up and they started working on it in 2018. But it definitely it struggled to really kind of get a hold. I think there was a lot of challenges in filling out the requirements and kind of really fleshing it out. So but in 2019, the team refocused and we started to focus on MVP. We did a lot of user interviews thanks to the relationship we started building in with the San Diego Hunger Coalition, and started working on how we can make sure that our calculations are actually optimal rather than just, oh, here's an optimization algorithm. It should be optimal, therefore. And I know like this CEP has been around since 2014, so it just getting going. Where in 2019, where we really started getting going, it took 5 years just to get there. So there's really a delay in opportunity here. Phase 2, so 2019, we really didn't manage to get something, even though we had put it together, we didn't really manage to get it in the hands of a lot of districts that were going to use it, because even though we had some districts who were starting with us, we really hadn't developed the brand yet, and we really hadn't gotten that level of engagement. So in the fall of 2019, we refocused, and I'm going to sort of break here because I'm realizing I did not talk about there's a seasonal aspect to this, which makes it challenging, especially for a brigade and for a group, and this especially in volunteer recruitment, because the USDA releases these numbers that are required for this applications in, I believe it's May or something like that. Don't quote me on it. But it released in May, and then basically you have like a month and a half to 2 months, depending on, obviously the last 2 years has been extensions, but you only have a few months to get those applications ready and submit them, and then that's done, and then basically it's see you next year. So what that has kind of implied upon our development cycle in our whole process here is that we actually have to do our development in like the fall, get everything rounded up by January, and then basically start doing PR where we're doing webinars and training the districts ahead of time, and then finally they'll hopefully use it in May to June as they're trying to scramble to get ready for the next school year. And thanks to the huge support of everyone else you see on the screen and the organizations behind them, we've finally figured out how this all works. But on the volunteer level, it has been definitely a challenge, because you say, hey, can you contribute to this project now? Whereas in 5 months, when maybe you're no longer available or have the time to contribute, that's where it might actually be used, possibly, we'll see. And that's been definitely a challenge. So jumping back to the timeline here, in spring 2020, we were really getting ready to go. And then, of course, the pandemic happened, and we kind of all said, we'll see what happens. But later on, there was a big extension, and suddenly all the districts were calling up to all these partner organizations and saying, hey, like our ISPs are going crazy. We need to figure out what's going on next year. And so we did a bunch of work, and we had a bunch of big webinars with nutrition directors, 200 attendees for, I think, Nourish California put one together, and No Kid Hungry also did a bunch. That's when we started working with Emily and the No Kid Hungry team. They brought in some analysts from Deloitte, which I guess is the partner organization. They helped us improve some of the optimization strategies. So we did a big push, and we had a lot of success in August of 2020. Here's kind of a quick snapshot. You can just see we just had a bunch of engagement, and this is not your typical web tracking. This is a whole people who were very much intentional. There's not that many nutrition directors, so a lot of people were engaging. The dark blue in California is all thanks to San Diego Hunger Coalition and Nourish California, and all the light blue in the rest is No Kid Hungry, and everyone all together. I mean, I think they all kind of really spread the word on this. So that was great. Of course, what it also turned out to be is that there was there ended up being waivers in the whole nutrition program for 2020, as we all are aware. 2020-21 is not what anyone would have expected or understood. So despite having this big push and getting people really interested, we there's been outside funding programs for these waivers that allow kids to have free lunch as it is right now. So for this spring, we've been really this spring, we've been trying to get everyone focused on doing this again. One of the big things is we refined the user interface, really kind of did some work to make it even simpler to adapt to all the things we learned in previous iterations. And we are really doing a lot of outreach, because one of the challenges now is that the waivers have been extended, that free lunch is available all through the next year. And so that means that if you applied for CEP now, it wouldn't really matter for this coming school year, because lunch is being reimbursed already by the federal government as it is. So we're really kind of asking nutrition directors to plan over a year in advance. Say, okay, I'm going to apply now for something that won't really be applicable until fall of 2022. And so that's kind of a big hill to climb right now. So even all the work we've done now, And we've achieved one temporary goal, which is that there's lots of funding available for free school meals, but that goes away, and yet the ISPs, the number of kids who are disadvantaged in the economic crisis right now is very high. We have an opportunity to lock in the high rates if we can get people to apply to the USDA for CEP now. So we kind of have that current challenge that we're dealing right now. And that's definitely something that we're trying to figure out now. So it's an interesting wrinkle as you develop these, develop the software, trying to really tune to this policy. The landscape of the world shifts, as we all know. So I'm gonna kind of, before I leave my section, I stuffed this last slide in here because I do want to talk to this. Those who are interested in contributing to Meals Count, I'm just gonna put that here, that there are lots of opportunities to help on the software side of what we're doing and the general parts there. And we'll also talk about more on the policy side later on in sort of in general terms. But you can, here's some notes that I'll also post to the chat going forward there. All right, I'm gonna switch over to one of my colleagues for assessing Meals Count impact.
Thanks, Nikolai. Next screen. Awesome. So just wanted to quickly, I think Nikolai summarized a lot of this already. We know that people are using it. You saw the map. People are using this to figure out whether or not they can start CEP, and using it to figure out if they can optimize what they're already doing. We've got website and visits and calculations happening across the country, and those who've used it have given us some really great feedback. Nutrition directors and districts who just couldn't have done this on their own without the tool. And we're getting great engagement with state agencies. And so those would be the departments of ed in each state that really support schools with these programs. If we can get them to know about the tool and use it and promote it with the districts, it will have a wider reach in the states. And so we've been really lucky to be able to bring the tool and train some of the state agency staff across the country on Meals Count. And Nikolai on the next slide alluded to, again, a lot of the quantitative challenges that we have this year. So we know people are using the tool. We're not then getting a lot of feedback afterwards on what % increase did they see in their meals participation because they adopted CEP, because they used it. That kind of testimony would be great to have to continue to amplify Meals Count, but we're not necessarily continuing the interaction with folks beyond their use of the tool. And again, it's just really hard to know this year and last year. Meals have been free for all through a program other than the National School Lunch Program. So it's actually the summer meals programs that schools are operating right now. Totally different programs. So again, we're asking folks to really dig into their numbers and optimize their groupings for a program that they're going to operate in a couple years down the line. And so I would imagine if we had started this either a couple years later or a couple years earlier, these quantitative challenges would look different. But it's, again, the pool of nutrition directors who have time and capacity to dedicate to thinking about CEP and really maximizing it for the future is even smaller than the general pool would usually be. So I think that about summarizes our challenges. It's just folks aren't really operating it, but we're excited for the following year when we really think, potentially even with some state and federal policy changes that will strengthen CEP, there's going to be a lot of folks rushing to use Meals Count. All right, I'll pass it back to the team. I think Amanda.
I'm up next with the Meals Count Partnership. I want to make sure I give a shout out in the chat. Jerry Hall's in there. So wonderful. Nikolai, I know you mentioned Jerry as being instrumental in the start of this project. So great to see you here, Jerry. And, you know, he's mentioning that, you know, it really burned him that there were so many kids that qualified for free school meals and they weren't getting them because of bureaucracy and meal forms and technical challenges, which, you know, this grouping technical challenge. And next slide, please. So when we really try to do anything with school meals, what we quickly learn is that school meals are, of course, distributed and managed at a local level. Just one person, that's a nutrition service director, that might be setting the menu, helping cook the food, helping distribute the food, is running all of the forms, and somehow and has to do all the hiring, and then somehow also still has to do this grouping. So, and the grouping and all the technical aspects are run by state agencies, and those state agencies are following federal policy. So if we think about maximizing school meals, we really need people that are on the ground who have connections with the schools, districts, and the nutritious service directors. We need people that understand our state agencies that are overseeing these programs. And then we also need people that understand the federal policy and the landscape and can also understand what's happening across the nation and make some connections. So this collaboration is amazing because we have Open San Diego that has the technical and implementation expertise. Having this tool as a thought is one thing, but having it that actually lives on the internet that districts can use is a miracle. I'd say the number one question we get is, are you sure it's free? Are you sure it's free? So we always had to put it out whenever we do webinars. It's free. It's really free because there isn't a whole lot of support out there for our schools and free tools. So it's excellent that it's free. Hunger Coalition, we provide our ears to the street so we can bring people in to try the tool and also bring problems or opportunities. Nourish California has tremendous relationships and understanding across the state and with administrators. And then it's No Kid Hungry. I mean, everybody knows No Kid Hungry, an integral partnership, understanding of federal policy, but really the whole landscape. And so this team in our diversity is our strength. It's the American way and it's this collaboration. So we couldn't ask for a better team. Next slide. And so some of the stuff that I already mentioned, but I'll cover it again. Open San Diego, maintaining and developing the software and website, Nourish California, the policy and programs, Hunger Coalition on the ground and relationships, bringing people in to test it, and No Kid Hungry, algorithm assistance, also on the ground expertise, also relationships with districts, but big in the integration of the meals count into the CEP revenue calculator. So it's a wonderful team. Thank you. Next slide. And then specifically, like that's kind of how we work, but what makes a collaboration work? The dedicated volunteers at Open San Diego, we couldn't say the fact that you're all volunteers is just amazing. So thank you for your steadfast persistence. I think that Jerry mentioned that also in the chat is that, you know, y'all stuck with it. And there's something to be said for showing up when things are sludgy and when things aren't optimal and sticking with it. We also found that we all had the right expert combination of skills, experience, whether it's technology, policy, programs, or relationships. And so we've really leaned on each other in some bumpy times during a pandemic to see who has any given skill or relationship. So that's been wonderful. And then perseverance and trust. So knowing that your teammates have your back and knowing that you're going to continue to show up at the table is also fundamental to any teamwork. We also have a tremendous attitude of service among all of us, I believe, and a commitment, free meals for children. And then I think the most important thing is that we meet regularly and we have a set meeting time. So every Friday at 1 o'clock, it's the meals count team and we get together and we encourage each other. We have some laughs, we look at chicken photos and we get to work. So it is all of that. It's the expertise, it's the trust, and it's the coming back to the virtual table time and time again. I think that might be it for me. Yes.
Nikolai, this is you and me teaming the meals count opportunity. So we just wanted to, meals count is one example of the ways that we can use algorithms to maximize some of the really wonky parts of these programs to get even wonkier, perhaps. So what I mentioned at the top of the call is there's all of these data sets that schools use to kind of bounce off of to see. Emily Pia is on the SNAP rolls. She's also enrolled at this school district. Match, tell the school nutrition director that she can be included in the ISP, is automatically qualified for free school meals based on participation in this other federal benefits program that aligns with the income thresholds. So there, in every state has a direct certification system that school districts use to upload their student rosters and to do that matching, and those are packed by algorithms as well. And there's a lot of room for improvement in these direct certification systems. So there's a lot of improvement that could happen to the algorithms. The SNAP algorithm in most states is about 90% effective, and that's the best program in terms of the accuracy with matching student records with public benefits records. So we have a long way to go with improving some of the other means tested benefits programs in the direct certification systems. And then there's another wonky piece where siblings, school nutrition directors can say, okay, Emily is on SNAP, she's certified, included in the ISP, but everyone who lives in Emily's household is also eligible to then be included in the ISP. The school nutrition directors have to do that work manually in most states. And it's something an algorithm can easily do, is say, this address, they're the same, they share a parent or guardian, add them. So there's definitely lots of opportunities within the federal child nutrition programs to think about how to use this kind of technology to really optimize participation in the programs. And again, kids are at the center of all of this. When kids are not being directly certified for free school meals, that means potentially that they're not getting them if they don't fill out the paperwork. So it's at worst extra paperwork for families to fill out and for schools to process, or at best. And at worst, it's a kid not getting the meals that they are rightfully deserving of. And although we think every kid in every school should get free meals, we definitely think that kids who are already participating in these programs that are other food assistance programs should definitely not have to do that paperwork and prove again that they qualify. So, Nikolai, anything to add?
Yeah, I think I'm going to also talk about, I think one of the other compelling parts about Meals Count more as a pattern is that what Meals Count does, as I think you've all gathered at this point, is it takes an existing policy and just basically optimizes it in its delivery in terms of what we can actually get out of it. And so I think that could potentially be a pattern for other groups to look at and say, given other existing policies that are already there, is there an opportunity to basically say, can we work together as groups, as nonprofits, as advocates, as volunteers, and can we make tools using technology to optimize the delivery of that? Can we look at opportunities like this grouping, or as Emily's alluding to, part of the formula that gets someone a higher reimbursement, part of it is the grouping, but part of it is also the ISP, which is something that a lot of schools have to work very hard to figure out what the maximum ISP is, how many kids are in there. There's lots of things and a lot of data tools that they need to streamline, and it's not even across states. There's other states do a better job of it in California due to just the way systems are architected and data is delivered in these different states. And so can we bring up the bar in general there and add to that and continue to optimize what's happening with all this policy that's already there and all these things are there? Can we just build tool sets to make sure that everyone's getting the most out of it to encourage our final goal? And I think that's kind of the second part of this. So yeah, that's kind of the challenge maybe I'll put out to everyone here is who's listening in, and they're definitely the right crowd is where else can we do this similar kind of thing, both in terms of the collaboration of having the domain expertise and reach of a basket of different groups of advocates and organizations, along with brigade volunteers or otherwise, and then also in terms of policy, seeing can we model the same opportunity here, where we can say here's existing policies, things in place already, but we can tune how well people use them and get them by providing tools like this through groups. So I think I will then move over to the last part here, which I think Angeles is going to do.
Oh, I think it's me, and then I'm going to kick it over to Angeles. So we have a few opportunities. If you feel inspired, and I see a lot of you in there are feeling inspired about feeding children through school meals. So there are some current opportunities and initiatives happening right now that you can take some action on. So we want to tell you about some local, state, and federal action. So let's first start with local. So we're going to encourage you, go check out Meals Count. So we have the URL in the chat. We'll put it in there again. But one of the very first things you can do is you can encourage CEP adoption at your local school and your local district. So I did this. I looked up like my grade school in my hometown on Meals Count, and I found that there was a neighboring grade school that had like 78% ISP and they were not offering CEP. So that to me is an action point. You can look it up. You can see if there's an ISP that's above 40, and you can call your nutrition service director and ask like, hey, have you considered community provision? I just learned about it. It's a way to get to universal food meals. And the more that districts and schools know the community is in support of universal free meals, the better. So use Meals Count, look up your local district and school and see if your local district or school is eligible and make a phone call. All right. And then for state action, I'm going to kick it over to Angeles.
Thank you, Amanda. So we have this great, powerful program available to many schools. And then we see that many of them are not using the program. And why is that? We have been asking nutrition directors and trying to find out what are the barriers to enroll in CEP. And we found out that many schools, the federal CEP funding formula doesn't work for them. The formula doesn't count for high operating costs in some of the states, and this makes CEP fiscally unattainable. Many schools that have low ISP, like for 40-50% of the kids are directly certified, they have a big gap on funding. And this big gap stops them from using the provision and providing the meals. So this is where the state funding comes in. A strategic investment of state dollars will allow more schools to offer free meals free of charge to all students. So combining a state investment with the available federal funding will help stabilize the budget for the school nutrition program, and that will increase the number of schools that operate CEP. And of course, that preserves the progress of other schools that have already made in serving meals free of charge to all students. And by targeting state funding to the schools and the students who need it the most, an investment in CEP will help more children in under-resourced communities get the nutrition meals that they need to learn, to grow, to achieve their fullest potential. And like Jerry was mentioning, of the kids that qualified, he mentioned in the comments, there are a lot of kids that do not get meals. About 20% of those kids that don't get meal would end up dropping out of school. And in California, that means 2 million kids who aren't getting the free meals that they need. So in California, 1 in 3 of the schools that are eligible to operate CEP, they haven't implemented it. And this is where you come in. We want you to ask your state legislators to implement CEP to help with funding that gap in CEP. And if we do that, if we get, for instance, all of the schools in California that are eligible for CEP, if we get them all in CEP, that will mean $1.1 billion in federal funding going to Californian schools. And so for every state dollar spent to maximize CEP, the federal government will contribute 8. And what does that mean? That means that is a big bite out of hunger in childhood. So please go and support any of the bills or any provisions that are asking to invest states in CEP. Thank you. I'll kick it back to Amanda.
Thank you. Okay, so if you're not already on the phone with your nutrition service director or your state legislator, This is the most important ask. So right now there is in the American Families Plan, there are some CEP provisions in there. So both to reimburse schools at a higher rate and lower the threshold for CEP eligibility from 40 to 25%. And we need all 56 of you who are watching this to call. It takes about 45 seconds. Call your senator and then call your congresswoman or your congressman. And we're going to give you a call script, but you just simply, usually they ask for your zip code. If you've never done this before, they connect you through. You don't need to know who it is. They will do all that work for you. You just call and say, I want to talk to my senator or I want to talk to my congressperson. And then you say, I'm a constituent. I'm calling in support of universal free meals. I even bolded and italicized where you should express intent. Specifically, the American Families Plan vision to expand CEP, what you've been hearing about, by reimbursing a higher percentage of meals at the free reimbursement rate and lowering the threshold for CEP eligibility to 25%. It's always important you say you're a constituent. And this is one of the fastest and best ways that you can support our work and you can support the expansion of universal free meals. There's a plan for it here in the American Families Plan. If that doesn't go through, there's also child nutrition reauthorization, which we won't get into, but your phone call will still make an impression on elected officials. So we'll put the phone number in there and the call script. But please pick up the phone after the Q&A, 45 seconds to feed children. Thank you. Please and thank you.
I think we're ready to do some questions. Emily, do you want to MC this or?
Sure. And I'm just putting in the chat now there's a question about whether or not the government publishes publicly any lists of schools that are adopting CEP or not adopting CEP. And there's a database that's organized by a partner organization called FRAC, the Food Research and Action Center, that I just put in the chat. And you can search by state and see the ISPs. And it's actually that database that is behind Meals Count. So if you went to Meals Count, you would find the same information as is on that database. So it is publicly available. It is a little delayed each year. So the deadline to apply for CEP is June 30th, but we don't find out which schools applied until states publish those lists the following May. So you're looking at schools that have applied or are in the middle of their 4-year CEP cycle from last year when you check out that database. So there's a question. There's a lot of criticism of using algorithms to distribute a social benefit. Did your team come across much hesitation or concern in your journey to launch? Anyone want to take that?
I'll take that. So I think that alluding to the free money slide, the Meals Count algorithm doesn't actually change anything tangible in where the benefits go and so on. It really just increases, if these are the schools being applied to, it just increases the overall amount of reimbursement. That being said, there is the potential for Meals Count to recommend a different set of groups being pushed into or being recommended to increase reimbursement. So there is some potential for that. I think that there is definitely, it's a valid criticism. So for example, a potential thing is that it might Meals Count might just look in terms of the algorithm, say, okay, we're going to take all these schools, and it turns out that we combine a poor school with a rich school, and we leave out the middle class school. That gives us a higher reimbursement, and that's just what it's going to. It doesn't know these it doesn't have any social consciousness that's going to just recommend this as the highest possible reimbursement. We do have opportunities that it's a little harder to put out there where we can say, maximize for coverage. But again, the same problem can occur where if we maximize for number of students being included in CEP, a slightly different maximization or optimization target, but we still have that problem. I think that the challenge here, it's something we really have to rely on the nutrition directors who ultimately are looking at this, and that's really one of the reasons why we put in flexibility, because we found that the nutrition directors say, okay, it's telling me this, but that's not really what my district needs. That's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to feed the kids in these schools because these are the schools that need it. So I think that's a very valid criticism. I don't think that that's what we're trying to do here for sure. And I don't think it automatically goes that way. I think by making the tool interactive, especially, we do that. And if anything, I think that there's a concern where and that we confronted up front that, when we first built it, just kind of like, here's the optimal thing. It was very much black box, like here's the grand wizard or magician says that you should do, and there's no real explanation of it. It's kind of the typical AI problems. Like it just says that this was the best. And so we've really worked to allow it so you can actually maneuver around and move schools around after the initial optimization. And you can see what happens to the change in the reimbursement. You've got like a history function where you can see all the optimizations and all your adjustments and see how much you lose by reshuffling the schools and seeing how those benefits change. And again, this is really calculating the reimbursement. The set of schools that are included, they all have to have the same benefits of kids. All the kids get free stigma-free free meals. It's just how much a school gets in aggregate. So really, the real concern is just which school is included or not included if there is a group of schools that just can't fit in to the program at some point. That's a great question.
I'll also add, I think the algorithms are only as good as the quality of the data behind it. And there are a lot of challenges with eligibility and enrollment in these public benefits programs by which we base eligibility for the Universal Free School Meals Program, CEP. So in a lot of school districts where there are schools with a high population of families with immigration status, you are going to see lower numbers, lower ISPs, which is merely a function of the fear of enrolling or participating in public benefits programs and or eligibility. So there are immigration restrictions for SNAP. So some families cannot enroll in these programs, yet it is the largest program that's kind of underlying the eligibility to serve universal free school meals via CEP. And so I think that's another important thing to keep in mind, and the reason why we all advocate that universal free school meals really is the goal. That is not conditional on data and whether or not a community is participating in those programs. We also see in rural areas where there's higher stigma for participating in these benefits programs, again, the ISPs look lower than what the actual need is. And so to me, those problems indicate that we need to move away from using this data at all to determine whether or not kids deserve free school meals. I think I also come from having served as a Peace Corps volunteer in a country that had universal free breakfast and lunch for all students, no questions asked. And now I come back to the United States, the wealthiest country in the world, and have to convince people that it's a need and something that kids deserve. So we are, I guess, all very passionate that and believe strongly that it shouldn't be predicated on this data or the algorithms that, do this work. We should just guarantee this free for all. But until then, we're grateful Meals Count exists and this team helped to bring it to fruition, because we also know that the more schools that participate in CEP, the smaller the jump is to universal free school meals for everyone. So this tool does a great job at really maximizing participation. And Nikolai, did you want to add something?
Oh, I was actually going to point out that you should also, while you're at it, also answer Sarah Schulte's a question about the reception outside of San Diego, because definitely you are the person, I got to give Emily credit. We were kind of really focusing on California in the beginning. Emily seized on the tool and really kind of promoted it nationwide through her work with No Kid Hungry. So maybe you can talk a little bit about Maryland and also kind of the reception across the country.
Sure. Yes, we have seen positive reception outside of San Diego for sure. As far as working specifically with Baltimore City, I can't speak to that. I have not worked directly with Baltimore City. We have sent the tool to the state agency in Maryland, so they are aware of it, the Department of Ed that supports all of these schools. It's just, again, there's not only schools are kind of lacking right now in the ability to think about the future, but state agencies are also struggling with having to administer a brand new benefits program that came on the scene during COVID that's kind of giving families essentially SNAP benefits, food stamp benefits for kids for the loss of the school meals that they've had to, when kids aren't in schools, they're not being able to access these meals. So they're now trying to administer all of these brand new programs, and CEP is low on the list of priority to get this tool out. But I anticipate in the future with our state agency partnerships that we'll be able to get Maryland and the school districts in Maryland to really seize on this tool. But I'd be happy to follow up, and if there's an opportunity to bring it to Baltimore City, Sarah, I would love to work with you, and we can find a way to set up some time.
Great. I'm going to answer the next two questions because I think they kind of relate to the brigade. So first for Wesley, as far as daytime meetings, so I think you're asking, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you're asking about kind of how does this work, especially the volunteer. I think, and also the challenge of generally a volunteer nonprofit tech projects like this, especially through the brigades coming to fruition. Number one is that the good part about working with a nonprofit is that these different nonprofit organizations, these are all staff members, and so for them this is kind of part of their day-to-day work. So they can do a huge amount in terms of project management, advocacy, preparation of information, domain expertise. They shoulder a huge burden, a tremendous amount of the effort in just getting the word out there, pushing forward things, and advocating for the project, and also helping manage the project on a day-to-day basis, what's important, setting up the user interviews. And so having the staff members of nonprofits available really anchored this project in kind of something worthwhile. That being said, there's also some luck in that I showed up as one of the volunteers, and also several of the other volunteers who've come along the way, that we have had the time in our schedule to kind of make this priority, and actually put the time in, and found that this is something. I'd say that actually the actual draw on a weekly basis isn't as big a thing as the time commitment long term. I've been working on this project for over 2 years now, and it surprises me every time I say that. And just kind of having and it's thanks to the volunteers at Open San Diego as well. We've had one of our other steering committee members, Marisa, really I was about to give up on this project in 2019, and she came back and said, "Okay, everyone, let's get this project back on the road again." So having we have a pretty good steering committee group in Open San Diego right now. And I think having that mutual support, kind of saying, no, this is gone long enough. Let's get this back together. And there's been turnover at different, at some of these organizations, and also in Open San Diego, and yet we've still managed to keep pushing it forward. And I think that the question of interaction with customers is also a really good one. I admit that there's been a little bit of gatekeeper, because I think in the beginning all the volunteers met simultaneously with the partners and with customers, and it was just a little bit too much going on. And so when I got back into it, we kind of slimmed it down. So we kind of had volunteers kind of coming one side and getting up to speed. And there's just a lot of loss, especially in meals count. I mean, for small front end stuff, it's no big deal. But for getting into the policy or getting into doing a full design, you really have to get up to speed with a lot of complicated policy stuff. So really kind of once a volunteer had been contributing for a while is really before we put them in the situation where they're listening and talking to both the partners, the group here, as well as our customers, or the districts who we're working with. And then as far as funding, I'll answer the last question too, because I know we're getting close to the line here. There isn't really any, the funding is really, honestly, there is a lot of funding in the sense of having the nonprofit staff work for this. That's huge. That is really what, at the end of the day, they're doing a huge amount of the work. If you look at hours dedicated to meals count, the vast majority of it is the time that everyone else here is spending. The tool itself is certainly has taken some time, volunteer time for design, development, and everything else like that. But it's drastically smaller than the amount of time that all these organizations have put into it, and the personal effort and the personal dedication that all of the people here and many others behind the scenes have put into it. I think once it's really kind of a snowball effect thing where we got it going. The actual website costs very little to host. At the end of the day, we cap the amount of compute power we put into any given optimization. So for the vast majority of people, and then we basically put out a call to any district that has a large number of groups that they just need to call us independently, and then we can actually run on a computer with a non kind of gated time frame. We'll run a longer optimization and usually try to tune the parameters a little bit. So definitely we haven't really run into actual monetary costs much as an issue. Hopefully I answered. And then as far as what helped push us over the launch line, I think again it's just perseverance and everyone here working together. And I think really it was honestly the collaboration of the teams. I'll pull it back to what Amanda talked about, getting the ball rolling, where we had all of us working together from all these different groups, and there's really not not any, I mean, I'd say, but there's no politics. It's just everyone's kind of working towards common goal. And I think because of that, we have really free communication, and we're jumping on each other's webinars, different organization webinars that like we're all kind of contributing to each other's webinars. We're all coming in and helping each other with slides and helping up with feedback and communicating with different groups and everything like that. And I think that really kind of building that team and getting that going and building that is what has worked. All right. I don't see any more questions coming in. Anybody who wants to throw a last one up there, now's the time to do it. Otherwise, I think we're pretty much at the end of our session. Thank you all very much for coming to hear about Meals Count.
Thank you so much. And just want to elevate, Zoe put in the chat that the deadline to adopt CEP has been extended to September 30th. So you've got till September 30th to call your former school districts and ask if they've considered operating free meals for all. So thank you, Zoe.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for all the nice comments in the chat.